On today's podcast, we're talking about loneliness in the workplace and strategies for leaders, teams, and organizations to connect with their people, re-engage with the minds and hearts of others, and create cultures that bring all into participation of a future culture that is being created. Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Hey everybody, it's Jason and welcome back to the Thermostat podcast, wherever you are and however you're coming to the podcast today. Welcome in. So glad you are here. If you are somebody who's been with us from the very beginning, so glad this continues to add value and contribute to your life and work. And if you are new to the podcast, so excited, continues to grow, spread, reach all kinds of places. So glad you're here. Hope you'll go back and check out the past episodes and micropods and great conversations that I've had with thought leaders from around the world. We're now in season 7. We got nearly 200 episodes, so many great things to go back and listen to. I appreciate you being here, and my commitment to you, as always, is I want this to be a place for you to step back and to breathe and to think about your own life and work and think about the temperature that you're trying to set in your life and your work, the culture that you're trying to create with the people around you, and what you're trying to be about and accomplish in the world. But before we dive into today's episode, if you'll do me the quick favor, if you will rate the podcast 5 stars, obviously individual episodes that resonate with you, to rate those, to rate the podcast as a whole 5 stars, of course. If you are willing to leave an authentic review in your own words on whatever platform you listen to, that is so helpful for people to know what resonated with you. What about this? Why'd this add value or contribute to your thinking? And obviously, every time you share the podcast with team members or colleagues, or say, hey, we ought to be talking about this in our team or organization, and share it on social media. All of those ways help amplify these messages further in the world, and I'm so grateful for everybody that does that. So thank you. A while back, you may remember me doing an episode that acknowledged the Surgeon General's declaration, yes, the Surgeon General of the United States, and the declaration that workplace cultures are now seen as a health crisis in America. So think about that. The research led the Surgeon General to specifically call out workplace environments and cultures as unhealthy for many people in the United States. Now, add on to that many studies are coming out certainly after the pandemic, post-pandemic, that continue to point to findings that the state of humans, human beings in general, have never felt lonelier in the workplace than ever before. And more people have cited that they are lonely, that they're disconnected, that they're disengaged within their organization. And yet, we also know the research around the desire that humans have to feel a sense of belonging. So we have a problem, which means we also have a tremendous opportunity for all leaders, teams, and organizations to re-engage their people, to connect with their people, to help people not feel lonely but feel engaged and connected to the mission and to each other and to the work that's happening in the world. So on today's podcast, we're talking about loneliness in the workplace and strategies for leaders, teams, and organizations to connect with their people, re-engage with the minds and hearts of others, and create cultures that bring all into participation of a future culture that is being created. But before we dive into today's topic, let's pause, take a quick break, and we'll be right back. If you haven't done so already, we hope you'll visit Amazon or Amplify or jasonvbarger.com to check out Breathing Oxygen, my new book, that is all about breathing good oxygen into ourselves and mindsets that fuel ourselves and the teams and the organizations around us. Positive, healthy thinking is as essential to great leadership and building a winning culture as the air we breathe. Leading yourself and a team of people has never been more complicated than it is today. As a leader, every move you make is either breathing life into your organization or slowly killing it. The atmosphere can easily turn toxic with negativity, blame, and doubt poisoning the culture. Just like every being on the planet needs good air to breathe, every organization needs leadership that breathes life into its people to sustain the energy required to complete its mission. Breathing Oxygen focuses on 6 key leadership mindsets that breathe life into any team: clarity, inclusivity, mental agility, grit, rest, and ownership. Join us, read, and share Breathing Oxygen.
Available now from Amplify Books on Amazon and jasonvbarger.com.
So studies show we've never been lonelier, and there are many toxic work cultures out there. People feel disconnected, disengaged, and in many ways kind of just going through the motions. Yet studies also show that people want a sense of belonging and want to be a part of more meaningful cultures. You can look back to past episodes that I've talked about the research coming out of the University of Penn and my good friend Tamara Miles around meaningful work cultures. We've just done a podcast recently about anti-toxic cultures. So you can check back some of those themes. But research is showing that people want a sense of belonging. They want to be a part of more meaningful culture, and yet the Surgeon General's identified that workplace culture is a health crisis in our country. And research tells us that people have never felt lonelier at work than they do now. And so these are just reminders to us that culture is dynamic, which means it's always changing. It's not static. It's always evolving. It's always growing. It's always changing. And as you know, what we talk about in this podcast, that it's shaped moment by moment every single day by the way we think, act, and interact. And so every person, every leader, every team, every organization has, not only an opportunity, but I believe an obligation to create a cultural ecosystem that helps bring out the best in people, connect people, engage the minds and hearts of people, and create a culture that's healthy in the way that we think, act, and interact. And you may remember on a past episode not too long ago, I did an episode about cultural dissonance, which that phrase, cultural dissonance, that means when our actions and behaviors, that we exhibit and we experience in a culture do not align with the culture that we say we want. So on teams, organizations that say, hey, this is the type of culture we want, but yet their action and behaviors don't back it up, that creates this kind of cultural dissonance. We also know that we live in a world, Gallup just had some recent research that tells us that 51% of all current employees, which I think 51%, are actively looking for a new job or watching for job opportunities. We know that today's employees in today's world are the consumers of the workplace. And so we know that any kind of toxic cultures or negative experiences or stagnant cultures that people experience within teams and organizations can jeopardize not only the employee experience, but an organization's entire effectiveness and the performance that comes from it, and certainly the overall brand of the company can suffer. And on the last episode that I just did, I talked about cultural fitness and us moving our mindset beyond just trying to find people that are a cultural fit for our organization and moving it to a cultural add or cultural contribution. And then the next step is seeing that the organization needs to contribute to ongoing cultural fitness, that because that ecosystem is always changing and shaping, we've got to continually stay and fit with each other. So the Harvard Business Review recently acknowledged that some of the ways that organizations are combating this sense of loneliness is by intentionally orchestrating empathy throughout their teams. Now, that's the phrase that they use, is intentionally orchestrating empathy throughout their teams. They pointed out, they point in the Harvard Business Review article, they use point to examples and efforts that some companies are making to facilitate meetings and events and sessions for teams to increase their social connections, their interactions, and create psychologically safe environments, for each other. And whereas the way they describe it, in my opinion, seems a bit manufactured, and even the term just orchestrated makes it seem like it's a performance. It seems a bit inauthentic to me. But what resonates with me is the intentionality and organizations and leaders that are realizing that they need to be intentional about bringing people together. And I do believe, from what I'm experiencing and viewing and seeing in the world, and many of the teams and organizations across industries that I'm lucky to support, is that I do believe the best places are intentionally designing experiences to engage their people and being intentional about reconnecting to each other and helping to shape that future culture together. Again, cultural fitness requires workouts, which means we got to come together and we got to work out. So a few observations that I've made from many different organizations and industries and teams. So building off of that Harvard Business Review study, but I'm going to use it from my own lens of what I'm seeing, what I'm experiencing, what I'm viewing. Over the last few years of moving through the pandemic, and now as we're in this phase of coming out and kind of still recovering from the pandemic, here are some observations I would share that combat or at least acknowledge these stats that have come to the surface around loneliness and unhealth and toxic kind of work cultures. So here's what I've noticed. One is that people are still catching their breath, and teams and organizations. I've witnessed that people are still catching their breath from the last few years of weirdo world. So much has happened over the last few years, and to be honest, I think people are still, and teams and organizations are still getting their feet beneath them. Some are still tired. Some are still getting back into kind of the new rhythm and new modes of operation, back into the offices, still juggling hybrid and remote work and all of that. But I think the reality that we need to just be honest about is that people are still catching their breath and still, I think, finding this new rhythm and learning how to breathe in kind of new ways. And organizations that are helping them catch their breath and kind of think about that are helping people kind of navigate their way through it. The second thing I would say is that connections, and this goes right in alignment with this study around loneliness, is that people need and want connection. And after we've asked people for many years to isolate and social distance, and yet now we have all these stats around loneliness that have arrived, it doesn't, I'll be Captain Obvious and just say, even those who want to stay remote, they also want to feel connected. And so we've asked people to isolate. We've asked people to social distance. We've spread out, and we've certainly gone to more hybrid environments. And yet we also have stats that now tell us people have never felt lonelier. So, and we also know people want and crave connection and want a sense of belonging in their team. So people crave connections, and leaders and teams have a tremendous opportunity right now to build those connections or watch their people become even more disengaged, and disconnect, and then ultimately leave. So connections is key. Clarity on the future. That's what I also see, is that people right now, especially coming out of so many years of uncertainty, that people want clarity on the future. They want to get excited about where you're heading as a team or as an organization, and they want to make the connection with clarity of what is the role that they are playing and helping to create it. And related to that, the fourth thing I would share is that people want to participate in the creation. So they don't want to just have clarity of where the team or organization is going and understand their role in helping to create it, but they want to actively participate. They want to feel like they are connected to what is being created and are active participants. They want to actively participate in that cultural fitness. And even if they are remote workers from a distance, they still want to be connected and feel like they are a participant in that creation for forward progress. And the fifth observation I would make is that the best leaders, teams, and organizations are making it intentional and that it's ongoing. It's not a one-time thing. This idea of cultural fitness requires ongoing workouts. You can't just work out one time and consider yourself in shape. So each team, each organization, each department needs to really be thinking, and the best are thinking that, hey, what are we doing to continue to come together and align and work out together so that we are in alignment around how we're showing up to do the work and the culture that we're trying to create. So they want to see you as leaders and as an organizations that you're committed to this ongoing culture shaping and that helping them develop individually and the organization collectively is a high priority. So I mention this all the time in culture shaping, that what we allow lingers, meaning the actions, behaviors, the habits that we allow that are counter to what we really want can kind of linger and fester and become the culture, which means, and no organization, no team is perfect. So there are always things that we can identify that we might be allowing to linger. But then we need to get clear on what are the things, the new habits, the new operations, the new intentional things that we're going to do to trigger a new and positive chain reaction. So a couple of questions for us to ponder for today and for you to think about wherever you may be listening today. Who might be experiencing loneliness within your team or within your organization, even if they aren't identifying that they are feeling that way? Oftentimes the research is saying that people are feeling this way, but they're not necessarily coming out and identifying that or telling their leaders about it. So who might be experiencing loneliness within your team or your organization? What is your strategy to help build connections and engagement? And what's your intentional strategy to shape the culture and breathe oxygen into people over the long haul so that it's not a one-time thing or a box that you check? So I hope today's episode got you thinking in some new ways. If a deeper dive into any of these topics is interesting to you, please reach out to us. Hit us up on email at info@jasonvbarger.com, info@jasonvbarger.com with any thoughts or questions or topics that you think would be helpful. And we'll continue to design content to help meet you where you are. Lastly, I hope you come back and go back in old episodes and listen to past interviews and past chats that I've had, past micropods or topics that will add value to you and your life and your work. Cheers to the path ahead for us, and remember that the future of leadership is you, is me, is us. We have the opportunity to get clear on the temperature we hope to set and then be courageous and committed to breathing oxygen into the mindsets and actions that will sustain our path forward. Step back. Remember, be a thermostat and breathe good oxygen. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.